This was the temporary chassis I made for the last time, just put there to support the back axle while I tested the suspension. But after a bit of head scratching, I decided this is closer to what I need. There's a central spine now, which will hold the pedal crank and the whole drivetrain. That has to be rigid and in the middle. The seat will sit on top of that, and all the pressures from the motor and from the pedaler have to be contained within it. And attached to that central spine are the 4 external corners. Again, these have to be held rigidly somehow because they will hold up the suspension over each wheel. That's the plan at the moment anyway. As I've said before, there are so many variables in this design that it's hard to make a start anywhere. Every part could be made differently, and that would affect all the parts around it. But this will help me figure out a lot of things. At the front is the pipe that the front suspension hangs on. It's fixed underneath in a groove. I'm trying some sailing quality shock cord, bungee cord. It worked, but this one's too thin really. In my attempts to set up the steering, I tried this out. I made a lever mechanism that slipped over the front pipe. I made some connecting rods and connected the wheels. And then added a horizontal steering column and attached that too. Which would have worked fine on a level road without any bumps. But I could see without even testing it that any bump would affect the steering. It's a shame really, because it was reasonably neat and lightweight. So I dumped that tube with the levers on it and had a good think and came up with something which technically should work much better. Now there's a sort of 3-cornered box that fits over the front pipe. It's free to rotate horizontally, but it can't move up and down. Now that should mean that the con rods that go from it to the wheels don't change length even when the wheels go up or down. So no more bump steering. Getting it to rotate the correct amount was a bit tricky, but there was just enough room if I put the pivot point as far forward as it would go. Now, there are lots of ways to activate that box and get it to rotate, and this was my first attempt. A large vertical pipe welded onto the box. Far too heavy, of course, but good for a trial. Somehow it has to be rotated by the use of the steering wheel. Now I found enough vice grips to see if it would work at all. Chris turned up just in time to film it. Okay, Chris, can you just wobble the steering there, please? Yes, so responsive. Okay, you have to do it backwards, but I'm going to have a go at driving this thing. Do you want to hold that?
Yeah, I can have it. I'll turn it up the other way, I think, for starters. Is that all right?
Yeah. And yes, it did sort of work, kind of. Though I had to remember to steer in the opposite way I wanted to go. In the final design, that would make life even more exciting, but probably isn't ideal. But then I modified it severely anyway. I cut off most of the pipe and reinstalled the box upside down so the connectors could be underneath and out of the way. And I added a real steering wheel, which I cut on the machine, on the router. Good grief, you can almost see that it's supposed to be a car now. The pipe that now sticks downwards now has two arms, and they are attached to the steering wheel by paracord. The cords cross over underneath, so now the steering does what you'd expect. Boring, but sensible. In fact, the steering was a little unpredictable, which I decided was due to the stretch in the cord. So I tried some thicker cord, which was worse, and some wire, which was too stiff, and some chain that was too bumpy. And finally I gave up and I went to the shop and I bought some of the right size wire, which did work. And now, for the first time, the steering seems pretty tight and secure. Perhaps the steering wheel itself could be bigger, so you have more control. Now I know steering wheels are usually at an angle, mounted on top of steering columns that are tilted, and I'll try that too when I have a universal joint or two. But actually I quite like this arrangement. Although Will pointed out that it would make the car look more like a hot rod. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I even considered a vertical steering column, like an old car or an old bus, which would make the connecting rods really easy and give you somewhere to rest your elbows. But the bottom of the column might foul the pedals and the chain, so it's probably not going to happen. And just for interest, I weighed the machine as it is now, under 35 kilos, 77 pounds. Obviously, most of that is the wheels and the axles, and then nothing much I can do about those. And of course, there's lots more weight to go on as the car develops, but some that can be taken off too. For instance, from that big central plank. I could cut a few holes in that, couldn't I? What do you think?